And finally, the last but not the least is to file that information with the regulatory authorities, and of course the reports can also be checked in whether they are technically consistent before it can be uploaded in the respective website. So that's the entire end-to-end process in 5 steps in a very simplified high-level view of how you would be able to convert the data from your existing template to an XBRL template. And this is effectively the philosophy or the steps by which you will be able to do that. What are some of the learnings or issues which other people or other organizations or other institutions have faced? Well, it is always not a very straightforward exercise, so there are certain things which need to be kept in mind from a practical doing perspective. And what this kind of slide tells us is some of the areas which we need to be very careful about, like for example, how we are treating the negative values. Now for example, if you want to show a cost as a negative number, you want to show a cost as a positive number. If you're showing it as a positive number, then you have to subtract. If you're showing it as a negative number, you have to add. So whether you are adding or subtracting, whether you're showing it as a plus or a minus is something you have to be extremely careful about, because if you make a mistake, then your balance sheet will not balance, or you will have some inconsistency in the way you are creating the number. So this is one area which is usually, sounds very simple, but it's usually a pitfall in terms of making sure that you have done the calculations in the right way. The XBRL starts with a X, and this X is an advantage as well as a disadvantage, and I'll explain to you why. Extensible part of a XBRL means that you can extend the taxonomy, which effectively means that if there is a standard taxonomy which has been defined and you have got something more to add to it, you can add more components to that taxonomy to suit your own purposes. The advantage being that you can use it for internal reporting, because your internal reporting could mean you are defining many other things which you are purely using for internal purposes, and hence you would want to extend the taxonomy. But the catch there is that you should not be extending something which is already present in the parent taxonomy, because if you do that, you will then make it inconsistent. Of course, this particular risk is not there right now, because MC have suggested that you cannot extend the taxonomy, but this is something which is usually a pitfall where you are able to extend the taxonomies, and we believe that this is something which will come up in the future. Even though this year you are not able to extend the taxonomy, but in the years to come that restriction will be waived off, specifically if you want to use XBRL reporting for your internal purposes. Sometimes you do incomplete tagging, so all the elements are not completely tagged. You miss out some elements, and that causes problems. There are some modeling rules which you may not be correctly using it from either a GAAP perspective or an IFRS perspective. If you are not specifying the right units of measure or decimals or attributes, then you can, if just a 1 decimal here and there or a unit which can be different, can actually completely change the way the data is getting displayed. So some issues which need to be aware of when you are preparing an XBRL instance document. So having seen what are the benefits, what are the challenges, what is it that is in store for us in the future? Now what we see is that there will be a convergence of a standard business reporting, SBR, which effectively means that regulators or organizations which need a lot of data would use this XBRL format to standardize amongst themselves, which would effectively mean that the burden on the companies for providing information would gradually go down, because what you will not have to do is to provide the same information to 2 different agencies in 2 different formats. Because if you are using XBRL, that is a standard, the standard taxonomy is there, and you have given that information once, which means that it can be reused in multiple places, and hence overall it is expected that the regulation burden or the total cost of compliance for an organization will effectively go down. It has happened in many countries. For example, in Netherlands, they have already formed one unified way in which you can send all your data. So what we call as a one-stop data drop effectively, which means that you have got one place and you can push all your data, and that's it. You do not have to worry about any other disclosure, and from there the information can be picked in by regulators, analysts, other stakeholders, and they can do whatever they want to do with that. So that's truly the benefit of how it can reduce the cost of compliance in the long run. Of course, the second vision is that about the way the information is getting analyzed socially, social analytics, which means that people who are able to access information using an RSS feed, or people who are able to access information from their websites or from the internet, are able to use that information in a way in which they just want to. They can exchange information, and this will be a tremendous boost to the analysts or between the organizations. For example, say you want to do benchmarking. You want to see how you are performing against, say, your peer group or the industry group. If the data is available in XBRL format and it is from a publicly available source, so it's not confidential in nature, you can very much reuse that information and use that for your own internal benchmarking purposes, and it will be so much easier rather than having to dig it through a particular document or a PDF file or any other. If it is in XBRL format, it's understood by everybody, and you can use that for all your analysis purposes. We talked about the automation of the last mile, and this is something which is actually a low-hanging fruit, because this is already something which you can easily achieve just by making sure that you are exposing your information in a standard format. Of course, it will lead to a much greater internal transparency because of two reasons. One is that you would have a standardized definition of each of the terms which you are using. So, for example, net revenue or say turnover. Now, there could be different definitions of revenue which might be floating around in the organization. If you are using XBRL and one taxonomy, it will have only one particular definition, and then that will mean that two people reading the same information are not interpreting the data in two different ways. They are interpreting the data in exactly the same way, and that is one of the key drivers of increasing transparency in the organization. Of course, with more disclosure, with more information coming in, there would also be more responsibility on the organization to ensure that what they are sharing is not increasing unduly the risk, and this would also mean that the monitoring and the timeliness of information which is getting shared is also monitored by the organization. So this is something on the downside, that because of the fact that you are constantly disclosing information in a way which can be reused, multiple people can see it at real time, the organizations in the future will have to be extra careful in terms of what they are publishing in XBRL format and have to ensure that they are absolutely accurate. So with those thoughts, I would just like to end my session, and we'll take up the questions towards the end. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Sudipta, for sharing your experience and also telling us about the road ahead for the Indian corporate sector. Friends, since morning we have been listening that before filing we have to do some tagging, some mapping, some validation tool,